This is Change Over Time, a podcast where I think historically about things I geek. I'm Daniel Horowitz-Garcia, the alternative historian. In the last episode, I visited a Puerto Rican restaurant in Atlanta and talked with volunteers responding to the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. I also talked with a historian of disasters to put this event into context. Not all of that content fit into the last episode, including an interview with a PhD candidate, Vicky Daniel, that never made it in. This bonus episode has some of the bits I thought were good, but didn't have space for last time. Vicky's interview isn't the best audio quality. My apologies to her and to you for that, but the content is awesome. Enjoy. What's your name?
Denise Silva.
Silva, do you live here in Atlanta?
I just relocated from New York in July.
Do you have family on the island?
Yes, I do. My stepmother, my sisters, my nephews, niece, aunts, uncles. I almost all my family's out there.
Do you know if they're okay?
I just spoke to my stepmother the day before yesterday, after a week. It was scary because she's diabetic and her medication needs to be refrigerated. My aunt actually works in San Juan in a hospital, so she was able to go back to my stepmother and bring her ice for her insulin. So it's scary. My uncle, he gets dialysis, so he's been lucky. They've been able to give him treatment.
My name is Vicky Daniel, and I'm a recent PhD in the history of science from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And my research focuses primarily on science of disaster victim identification. I mean, there's so much about this particular handling of the disaster that feels unprecedented, even if it has sort of glimmers of what's happened before. Certainly having the President of the United States come out and glibly say, well, it's only 16. I mean, you could also argue that if it's only 16, that's still 16 people. That's still 16 lives. There's a sort of callousness to that is already in and of itself shocking.
Porque yo digo que soy Boricua como el Coquí.
It's just scary because there's still no water, no light, no power. There's still no communication in a lot of places. And I have family that have to travel to find service in order for them to let us know that they're okay. So it's still scary.
But I also think that one of the things that President Trump's comment really dramatically misses the mark on is that there's a difference between deaths that we might also consider tragically unavoidable in the context of a disaster, and then there are the preventable deaths without water, without appropriate shelter, without air conditioning, electricity, etc. You're really creating these conditions that are quite dire for people who are immunocompromised, who are reliant on medical technologies, and just the elderly. It's not just the fact that it's done sort of to us, but it's something that we actually still have control over. And the question is whether the infrastructure and the state is willing to sort of acknowledge that we have responsibility still to those bodies, right?
I'm Jacob Remus. I'm the author of Disaster Citizenship. The way we set up the world is all about human choices in the past and in the present. This is why I love studying history and why I think history is so important. That so often we hear in popular culture or from politicians that the world that we have is like the natural world that was destined to happen, and that's not true, right? We know because we study as people who study history, right? Like there are other choices. We can set up our societies in other ways and distribute resources and distribute negative resources, right? Distribute risk in other ways depending on how we choose to run things. Thinking about Puerto Rico as an example, in the interior of Puerto Rico, right, there are towns in which the state was not present for like 2 weeks, right? Like there was like no communication, there was no relief, there was no aid, not from Washington, but also not from San Juan, and people there I don't know what they did, but people there had to figure out how to survive and how to help each other and how to sort of contribute to mutual aid without the state, without any of those ordinary sort of social resources. And that is both terrible, right? But also really exciting, right? It's this moment in which people are forced by privation to come up with something really creative and new. And possibly that moment, those 2 weeks of solidarity and helping each other because they had no choice, can be brought forward into time when the state finally restores itself and people can remember that, and it will change, and it can change politics.
What's your name?
Yashira.
How long have you been working at Boricua?
I've been like 2 years, almost 2 years. Yes, sir.
Tell me about the response and about the people who have
Oh
come.
my God, yes, it's awesome. Everybody's bringing a lot of stuff. The responses has been great. Like, we have a lot of people helping us, a lot of people bringing donations. I can explain how much people or how much stuff we got, like just in less than a week. It's been great. And people calling and calling, trying to see if we will stop taking donations or if we go and keep accepting donations. Is awesome.
Right, like I think we see this in lots of disasters. We see all this like outpouring of wanting to help, right? We're told so often that what happens in disasters is the opposite, is like antisocial behavior, looting, and people, all the things that we were told that first week of Katrina. In contrast, what we actually see in disasters is this outpouring of support, both outside the disaster area, right, like what you're talking about, but also inside the disaster area. And the challenge, the real question is, how do you continue that past the moment of crisis? How do you remember, both in terms of spaces, but also in terms of social practices, how do you remember the way you felt when you were eager to help people who you couldn't in your imagined community? And how do you keep that up in a year or 2 years or 3 years? I mean, my kind of standard answer is like, by building organizations that are about building solidarity and where their purpose is to create cultures of solidarity, and so you institutionalize that feeling. But I don't really have an answer about like, how does this restaurant in Atlanta continue to be both a restaurant, which presumably its owner wants it to be, and also a meaningful community center.
What's your job? What do you do?
A little bit of everything, but since there's a lot of hands working over there, so I decided to just have the boxes ready for them.
It's everybody. It's not even in Georgia. It's Georgia and any other states. I got people from Tennessee, from Carolinas, and from Florida. It's a lot of people working together from Ohio.
And I think that, you know, what kind of matters is that right now, at least from the mainland, right, the language is being controlled by certain voices. And I think that when there's an opportunity to do so, we need to get more Puerto Rican voices into this conversation, right? I mean, we're still at the level of talking with people who've talked to people who are there. Years down the road, like, there's a reckoning to be had about what happened that has to include Puerto Ricans.
Yo a mi tierra le he cantado.
I mean, it's really easy to be pessimistic when you're talking about disasters, for obvious reasons. And in particular, it's really easy to be pessimistic when you're talking about disasters in the way that they replicate social divisions and inequalities, which they very often usually do. But I do try to talk about the optimism of disasters because I think that they are moments of possibility and moments around which we can organize, because there is this flowering of solidarity and mutual aid and altruism. I was saying this to a student the other day, that I try to cultivate the optimism that the post-disaster altruism and solidarity is going to last and is going to be remembered and make things better. And it's true, I can't point to very many instances where that has happened. Usually the state wins, usually capital wins, usually white supremacy wins. But hope springs eternal. One day it will happen, maybe.
You can find more information about Change Over Time at changeovertimepodcast.com. I also tweet at Daniel Alt Hist. Take a moment to rate this 5 stars. It helps people find the podcast. Safe travels.